They need an ID card, a bank account, national insurance number. All of these things are not a given when you leave prison. And guess what? If you don't have these things, you can't get a job and you're going to reoffend.
Hi, I'm Belden Mankus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Max Dubiel, co-founder of Redemption Roasters, a fast-growing social impact coffee business based in London. The company runs an industrial-scale coffee roastery and barista training academy inside the UK prison system. When the trained prisoners are released, Redemption Roasters aims to employ them at one of its retail coffee shops or refer them to one of its wholesale clients. The aim is to reduce reoffending in the UK. More than 50% of ex-offenders go on to reoffend, costing the taxpayers an estimated £18.5 billion yearly. Ex-offenders who leave prison with skills and a job are 50% less likely to reoffend. Max, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. As you know, Max, on this podcast, we explore the interaction between purpose and strategy, and I'm particularly interested in how businesses put strategy work in their organization and how they use purpose to shape business strategy. So let's maybe start just by defining our terms a bit. How do you define purpose generally? What is it? What's it for?
Purpose for us is working with program participants, as we call them. So that would be usually men, but also women who are incarcerated, but also men and sometimes women who have previously been incarcerated and are now in the community trying to put their lives back together. Purpose for us means achieving measurable outcomes with these participants. So a measurable outcome would be a job outcome, for example. For someone who was previously incarcerated, it's extremely difficult to find a job once you've been in prison. So for every person that we employ, that drastically reduces their chances to reoffend and become part of that vicious cycle again. Other measurable outcomes that we look at is what percentage of our staff do we employ from prison leavers? Because that measures not just the total figure, but it measures how much of our overall effort as a growing business are we putting into our purpose. And as you can probably imagine, that's a difficult balance to keep, because if we employed 100% of our staff from prison leavers, we would probably be really struggling, both as a business as well as a purposeful organization. There's a sweet spot here to achieve our purpose.
And where is that sweet spot? Where have you found works really well?
For us, it's about the 20% mark. 20% of our workforce working in the shops come from our participants. At the moment, all of them are prison leavers. There was a time when some of our participants weren't just prison leavers, but also those at the risk of crime. There's a number of factors that make you more likely to be at the risk of crime. And during the pandemic, for example, all prisons were essentially in shutdown mode. So we couldn't get any positive progressions through the gates. So we were working with the Department for Work and Pensions and worked with individuals who were at the risk of crime and putting them through our community training and then into our shops.
I'm guessing that part of what makes that 20% number work is that for every prison leaver you've got working, they're surrounded by other people who have had different life experiences and have other people to connect to, which I assume helps.
Correct. Yeah, that's a really important part of re-socialization. When somebody leaves prison, especially when they've had a long sentence, they're very institutionalized. I mean, simple things that you and I just take for granted, such as setting an alarm in the morning and knowing your routine and having a set of keys in your pocket that gives you access to certain buildings, knowing how to get from A to B and how long it will take you. These are all things that we completely take for granted. If you've been in prison, it's quite likely that you will struggle with these things, and that will make you struggle become a functioning member of society, because not every employer says, all right, fine, you're 45 minutes late today, but don't worry, I know you struggled getting here. So these things are very important to bear in mind. And the people you surround yourself with is one of the very important factors in rehabilitation.
How did you get to this purpose? Because coffee and prison leavers aren't an immediately obvious connection.
That's quite right, yeah. So I was previously a coffee entrepreneur. I started another coffee company called Black Sheep with the 3 university friends. And then at some point, after about 2 years, I spun out the wholesale business into a separate company and took my now business partner Ted on board. Initially, we just distributed Black Sheep Coffee wholesale, but quite quickly realized that we wanted to do our own thing brand-wise. And so we were looking around for opportunities to rebrand and do something quite exciting and also meaningful. And we came across somebody at a trade show who worked for the Ministry of Justice in reducing reoffending, and who said, we're looking for barista training in prisons. And we thought, this is interesting.
Ah,
I've never been to prison before. This could be an interesting angle,
yeah.
but it didn't really click right away. Also, we were part of that ignorant bubble that just assumes the justice system works. And once we had our first meeting outside of the trade show with this man and some of his colleagues, we actually went into a prison for that. And we did quite a bit of research and reading on the state of the justice system. We found out what the problems were and how bad the situation was. I mean, some of the statistics that you mentioned earlier, the costs to the taxpayer, but also the enormous human cost to people being locked up for sometimes up to 23 hours a day for sometimes a big part of their lives, and going in and out and in and out. And then also the human cost of crime, victims of crime, communities less safe than they should be. And we thought there's probably something we can do here. And we think public sentiment would be on our side as well. And so we came up with a concept called Redemption Roasters. The idea being that we reduce reoffending through specialty coffee skills. And rather than just doing barista training, as was initially suggested, we would actually also roast our coffee on the inside. And roasting is an industrial process, so it's much more involved, and certainly not an easy feat putting a big industrial plant into a prison. But we were really naive, as most entrepreneurs, and thought we can make it work, and eventually we did. And here we are 8 years later, and we've got 10 coffee shops. We've actually changed roastery location once from one prison to another because we outgrew the last space that we had. It was in HMYOI Aylesbury. We're now in HMP The Malnet. It's an industrial unit. Back then it was maybe 120 square meter former staff kitchen. And now we're in a 400 square meter industrial unit with roller shutters and all the things that you'd expect in a light industrial unit. So yeah, that was also an exciting moment, realizing that we've outgrown the capacity we initially set up.
You've been doing this for 8 years. Have you been able to keep track of the people as they come through your program, see what happens afterwards and what seems to create better outcomes and maybe what leads to less appealing outcomes?
Yes and no. I think over time we've become a lot better at measuring and evaluating the data that comes from our work. It's a really tricky task. And if you ask 4 researchers about the nation's reoffending rate, you'll probably get 4 different numbers, because measuring reoffending is incredibly difficult. It's not as black and white as one would think, because quite often people go into prison before they've been sentenced. Quite often people are released before they've served their full sentence, so then they may get recalled. There's a lot of grey areas. Did they reoffend? Yes, no. So measuring these numbers is really difficult. There's also probably the highest form of data protection governing over these kinds of data. So there's a lot of difficulties measuring it. That being said, we are very proud to have worked in 18 prisons and have worked with more than 2,000 individuals. We have an impact funnel. So at the very tip of the impact funnel, there's not a lot of depth in the impact. There's a lot of breadth. So what does that mean? That means we work with a lot of individuals, but it doesn't mean that we give them the maximum amount of interventions that we can. So that's the top of the funnel. That could mean we've given someone a 1 week barista course in a prison. We work in other prisons than our roastery, by the way. Then further down the funnel, it would mean that we've had a positive progression. So maybe from having done a barista course, they would then work in a prison cafe and work on their skills there, and maybe we're giving them some follow-on training. A little bit further down the funnel, it could mean they get released, and then from release, we would give them some training in our community training center. So that would be the third intervention. So you're now moving from breadth of impact to depth of impact, because we've now given that individual quite a lot of interventions. And then the next step would be they work in one of our cafes. And then the next step would be we move them on to perhaps one of our wholesale clients or one of the partner organizations we work with. And that would have been the entire journey. So if you were to ask me how many individuals have you worked with, I can give you the 2,000 plus figure, which is at the tip of the funnel. I can also give you the figure at the bottom of the funnel of people we've done all the interventions with. And that's more in the low hundreds, I'd say 100 and something, where we've done absolutely everything and they haven't reoffended. So measuring impact for an organization like ours isn't as easy as planting trees and saying we've planted 1 million trees over the last couple of years. It's a lot more difficult, but we like that challenge. And I think we've become a lot better at measuring and then also reporting on it. We publish a yearly social impact report, and that lists quite clearly where we are in each of these stages of the funnel and what we've achieved over the year.
So just a little curious what you see as the business benefits of employing former prisoners.
It is very good to have a purpose as a business, because it will work in your favor. It certainly does for us, in the sense that your stakeholders will usually buy into it. And that's not just your potential investors, not just your customers. That could be your landlords, that could be your staff. There's so many more stakeholders in the business ecosphere than your customers. And if all of them jointly buy into your purpose, then it will give you a benefit. And I'm not saying that landlords will give us their units for free, or our customers will be willing to drink terrible overpriced coffee just because we have a purpose. But it's just going to put you up a notch in their priority list. Our landlords may not give us crazy terms, but it may just push us to the top of the pile because they want to fulfill their ESG credentials and love talking about us to their shareholders and stakeholders. So it definitely helps, and it's definitely helped us fundraise. We've raised very competitive valuations in the past in sometimes very difficult climates. We've just closed a fundraise and we did very well. It was much more successful than we thought it would be. So I think your purpose gets valued in your business by all the stakeholders, and as such, it works for you. There's also some practical elements of employing prison leavers, and I would encourage even businesses that may have their purpose in other areas to do so, because there's clear business benefit as well just by doing it. Staff retention. We measure our staff retention quite carefully. Hospitality businesses generally struggle a lot with staff retention. On average, our participants stay with us for 30% longer than our non-participant staff. So there's a clear business benefit here. There's a loyalty aspect and an enthusiasm aspect as well. If you have somebody who has had all of the interventions I mentioned as part of the funnel, or just some of them, they become so loyal and so thankful that you've helped them to break that cycle that they will tell everyone about it. Some of the strongest marketing material that we've produced and other organizations in our space produce is testimonies of program participants who say, this has changed my life. Even if we just changed one person's life over the last year, I think it would all be worth it. It would all be worth the hard labor and blood, sweat, and tears that you put into a business if it can significantly change someone's life. This is the space where you're dealing with extremely vulnerable individuals who would normally go on to reoffend. If you can give them the skills and the opportunities not to, you will be rewarded.
You've been in business for a number of years. You've got the roasting and wholesaling part of the business and the retailing. You've got 10 or so outlets. What's your sense of how all that's going? Is that where you'd have expected to be? You said you raised some money. Is that part of a big expansion plan? What's ahead of where you are?
Good question. My business partner Ted and I, we're not your long-term visionaries. So
Mm-hmm.
we don't have a 10-year billion-dollar vision of how we want to take over the world.
Mm-hmm.
We usually go by the 3-year vision. And that's much more realistic and less dreamy, I guess. You have to put at least a 3-year business plan in front of your
Mm-hmm.
investors. We have achieved the figures we set out to, and that's been really reassuring. We've grown 60% year on year, and it's been a really good journey as such. Talking of strategy and sort of shaping your strategy, one thing that we have implemented and that's worked very well for us is keeping it simple, doing what you do well and rinsing and repeating that. Just because I think as you grow, you have so many opportunities to get sidetracked. I'm myself guilty of this. I have an extremely short attention span. I can get very excited about a new idea that
Mm-hmm.
somebody's just sent me an email about. But my business partner, Ted, has been really good at keeping me in check and making sure that we just do what we do well and just repeat it.
What I take from that is you're going to continue to grow the retail outlets. You're going to try and expand the number of participants you can work with, because if you're going to hit that 20% or so number, they need to go together. Where does the wholesale side of the business fit in?
In the same vein. So the
Mm-hmm.
wholesale side of the business is mostly down to referrals. We do attend a couple of trade shows, but it is referrals from existing clients. But also, we have a couple of corporate clients. So I think as we grow in footprint across
Mm-hmm.
London and have more stores, it will attract more corporate clients who simply know about us because of the doors that we have across town. Which is another way
And
of saying
if
that
I,
our wholesale business has grown organically alongside our retail expansion. It is
yeah.
more difficult to grow. If I had £100 million tomorrow, I could open a lot of stores,
Mm.
but I can't just hire 35 account managers and expect my wholesale sales to increase in line with that. That
Mm-hmm.
being said, wholesale is a more profitable business and it requires much less overhead than retail.
And in terms of where the program participants end up, do they exclusively go into the retail outlets, or once they've been released, is there also a role for them in the wholesale side of the business?
We actively encourage all members of staff to apply for internal promotions and HQ roles. The large majority of
Mm-hmm.
the jobs that we have on offer is in the shops by the very nature of what we do. So that's where you'll find the majority of the participants. But we do have quite a few participants working in HQ as well. And the majority of them would have started in the shops.
What's the longest any program participant's been with you post release?
It's a good question. I'd guess about 3 years. I think so. I
Uh
think
huh.
3 years. Longest running tenure is about the 2.5 year mark.
You were talking about the need to learn new habits and adjust to being no longer in an institution. From your experience, how long does that take?
I think it depends on the support network that somebody's
Yeah.
got. So some people are lucky in the sense that they've got friends and family who take them back and who are reasonable and helping them stay on the right track. Age plays a role as well. Length of incarceration plays a role. Amount of trauma that they may have been through. There are some triggers that may come up again. Previous relationships may come back, or previous maybe unreasonable friends
Mm,
who dabble in criminality may come back into someone's life, and then all the good intentions
right.
are much more difficult to stay by. So it really
Yeah.
depends on a lot of factors. Statistically speaking, the first 6 weeks after someone's release are the time when they're most vulnerable and
Mm,
most likely to reoffend. And
yeah.
that will be probably less subtle factors than mental health. It'll be much more practical factors such as housing or substance abuse or
Mm.
simple money matters that will lead somebody to reoffend within that time frame rather than a mental health issue.
In addition to the employment opportunity and the trainings, do you provide other support, helping people find housing, maybe some sort of cash advance, whatever. Do you do something different in those first few weeks, or are you looking for the rest of the system to do some of that?
Absolutely, it's a really important part of what we do. So we employ social workers. We have 3 social workers that do nothing but look after our participants. And they have great connections with housing charities, mental health charities, financial
Mm-hmm.
planning charities. And so we can refer and we can make quite a few things happen. We do have a small hardship fund as well, where we help people with clothing and an Oyster card and things like that when they leave. But we have to also be aware that we're still a business and not a charity. There's only so much we can do for somebody before we need external help and before we also need people to help themselves
Yeah,
however they can.
I guess that must be one of the trickier transitions is how do people mentally start saying to themselves, no, I can do this. I need to be responsible for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Bear in mind that we've had a good opportunity usually to meet them in custody already during training or in the roastery. That helps in also assessing their appetite and their willingness to turn their lives around. We
Yeah.
would not want to waste our time on somebody who's not dead set on turning their life around. And therefore, we rigorously filter to make sure that the men and women we work with are most likely to want to help themselves as well.
Do you think you're going to get to a point where the number of people who have that mindset, who have that intention, are not enough to fill up the growth aspirations of the business times 20% of the staff? Or is it there's so much to go for on that side that you're not at all worried about that?
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. I mean, we have over 90,000 people incarcerated in the UK. And if anything, the prison population is growing,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And at the moment, we have a big problem with overcrowded prisons. We've had early
Mm-hmm.
release schemes where people get released not just a week before the end of their sentence, but sometimes 3 or 6 weeks before the end of their sentence, which in theory can be a good thing if there's no risk to themselves or to society. But in practice, it's extremely chaotic. If you talk to probation officers, they're completely overwhelmed with their workload. And it means that the wraparound services, the wraparound support that somebody needs when they leave prison, really simple, practical things. They need an ID card, a bank account, national
Yeah.
insurance number. All of these things are not a given when you leave prison. And guess what? If you don't have these things, you can't get a job and you're going to reoffend. So we're not doing ourselves any favor with how chaotically the releasing is handled at the moment.
If I came into one of your shops, would just kind of looking around, would I have any sense that, oh yeah, that must be the 1 in 5 in this shop who's in the program, or is it just you can't tell?
Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And that's nice to have a mix where
Sure.
yeah, you're left guessing.
What advice might you give to other CEOs when they're thinking about their own business and purpose and strategy?
Yes. So I think when you look at the strategy for purpose versus the strategy for business, I think you need to be really clear in what comes first and
Mm-hmm.
and how you want to satisfy both, because there's always going to be a trade-off. You can always be in the extremes of using all your money and more on your purpose and achieving amazing things, but equally
Mm-hmm.
you can have a little bit of purpose and be a very successful, profitable business. I think you need to be really clear with yourself, your business partners, your shareholders, your stakeholders, what you want to achieve. We have turned down potential investors in the past who weren't quite aligned with us on where we are on this spectrum and in what we want to achieve. What I always say about redemption is that first and foremost, we are a business and we don't pretend to be a charity. If we don't make a profit, we are going under. So
Mm-hmm.
it is extremely important for us to make a profit. And whilst the purpose is baked into our business model, and we're very happy to report on KPIs on how we're doing, it is very important that this is never at the detriment of us being a successful business.
I guess there's a certain logic that says if you're not successful as a business, you're not going to be around very long, and anything you're doing on the purpose is going to go away.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. The other thing is when you work with a marginalized group, and then also when you work with prisons, I think you need to make sure that your product is damn good. Just because people do not associate excellent produce coming from prisons.
Yes.
You have to almost work harder than your regular coffee business to demonstrate that great things can come out of prisons. And that includes very delicious coffee.
Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like listeners to know?
We run an e-commerce
Good.
business.
Plug away.
Where you can order our coffee for home, and we do wholesale. That aside, I think plugging our purpose and just saying that employing marginalized groups, employing prison leavers, employing people who may have been homeless in the past, may be a little bit more difficult at the beginning, but it will pay back handsomely, both in the recognition and hard work and dedication you get from the individual, but also when you talk about the things that you do, you will get it back from your other shareholders. You will get recognition for it and your stakeholders. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. And whilst the Ministry of Justice is sometimes a bit clunky and trying to find its feet in working with business, not saying it's been an easy journey for us, ultimately it is absolutely the right thing to do. And I would encourage you to do it.
And that's a great message. Anything you'd like to ask me?
Just looking at your previous guest list, be interested in a bit of a red thread when it comes to traversing that balance between profit and purpose amongst the leaders you've interviewed.
A couple of thoughts maybe on that. Not everyone that I've interviewed has been leading a business. Some of them are leading charities. But for the ones that are a business, and I suppose for all of them, they need to ensure that they're financially sustainable, almost before anything else. Exactly the same logic, whether you're a business or not. If you don't have the resources coming in from somewhere on a sustainable basis, you can't deliver anything. And therefore, I think trying to fit together a business model that directly aligns with your purpose is one of the bigger challenges. And some CEOs have done a really clear, good job of that. I think I'd put you and Redemption Roasters in that category. You know, it's inherent in your business model that you can't deliver it the way you've set it up unless you're also driving the purpose. Seen others where there's more inherent tension between where the business strategy takes you and where the purpose might take you.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it's always a process of finding that sweet spot. I'm not saying we've perfectly found it quite yet.
If I understand right, you do all of your roasting in prisons.
That is true. Yeah.
So,
Currently,
so
that is
if
true.
you're not doing that, then it's not working. It's inherent in the proposition almost that you're going to be doing some of that.
I think our most important outcome is employing prison leavers, because that's really the real difficulty. I think the justice system struggles with meaningful employment and skills. But yes, I agree.
Part of your whole brand proposition is the purpose. It's why come here rather than go to any one of the other places one could go for a caffeinated beverage. It's really pretty deeply in it. It's not an add-on. It's not something you're doing on the side.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just a gimmick.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Max. I'm so glad to have had a chance to hear a bit more about what you and Redemption Roasters are doing. And I'd love to hear more as you continue to grow and develop. So perhaps if you're willing, we'll have you back.
Sure. Yeah, would be a pleasure.
That's great. Again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your journey so far.
Yes, great pleasure. Thank you for having me, Belton.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. Please email any suggestions or questions to Belden, podcast@mancus.com. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.